Tom?
I'm looking at the yellow and red that's down there along Highway 8. Are those under Highway 8 where we're currently having road work?
We talked about that. Maybe I can touch on that, and Les could add a little bit. I think we looked at that several months ago and brought that to the city's attention, and engineering staff, my understanding, reviewed that and felt like they could extend a parallel line that we're proposing outside of the paved section.
That's under the last year's
Les, want to elaborate?
The area, actually starting at the plant on the very left end of the screen, and the red section as it works its way east, and then the yellows and greens along State Highway 8 that you're referring to, Tom. Those are all in what we consider our southwest trunk line corridor. Right? It's a project that we've been working towards for quite some time. We've have some pieces of it in place already. There's some funding in our sewer capital budget already to move on to the next project, which will be the piece closest to the plant. As part of that overall planning process, though, on the State 8 section you're talking about, we looked at what alignment makes sense for the new system. And with the last two highway projects, that question was reviewed to make sure that we weren't leaving ourselves in a situation where we would have to go back and tear up a highway, which we don't want to do. The alignment out in that area is intended to go off to the side of the highway as it's currently laid out, so we're not anticipating a problem with where it's currently located under the highway and where a future line will be placed.
Okay.
So just a question for me then. In your opening remarks and in your slide presentation tonight, you were talking about 81 miles of line and 1,820 manholes, and I know in our just big review document here, you're talking about 73 miles of line and 1,780. Have we added since in this period of time?
No, that was typo in Chapter 1. We got it corrected in Chapter 2, but
okay.
I got it flagged already.
Do you?
Oh, darn
okay.
it.
So I was just thinking
Yeah,
maybe we've built something I hadn't heard
good
about.
catch.
So,
Yeah.
Walter.
Les, in the Paradise Creek realignment work that was done by the Corps at the university, was right in here, was not some 36-inch pipe put in?
Some huge
Or
part is
something, not a lot, but some that is part of what is recommended in this report?
Yes, that is correct. Actually, the blue pipe that you see in that area, it has that jog at about Line Street, kind of jogs to the northwest and then runs along the red pipe. That represents that 36-inch that was installed as part of that core project. So yes, part of that has been done. The section that's in red here through that area is the other line. There are two. It has capacity problems.
And I should point out that for not having a plan that's been updated in a long time, the city has had a lot of foresight, and it was very great for good luck, I guess, maybe for the city that the sizes work out great for what you've done. The pieces you put in, they work right in just perfect with the long-term plan for the study area. We'll come back to the master plan in a minute. Want to get off on a different topic, and that's with the looking at the reuse as an option. Part of the motivation looking at this was, well, what if we can take some of this flow and capture it out there in the basin someplace and reuse it there locally, so that we don't have to pay to upsize all the pipelines all the way down to the plant, and then turn around and treat it and maybe turn around and pump it and bring it all the way back up. And so we looked at that. We looked at 3 remote sites. This graphic shows one. We have a potential scalping plant kind of over here near Mountain View Road there, and you can see some of the parks we identified that could be potential reuse sites, and we looked at the flows that could come in there, and as we looked at the different options, we determined that a scalping plant wasn't going to really save any capacity downstream, because you still needed to be able to send that flow down during the periods of during the winter periods when you didn't need the irrigation water. And so that savings really wasn't available to the city unless you're going to go to the extent of getting another discharge permit and piping another pipe all the way down to surface water of the U.S. And that wasn't going to be a real feasible option. And so we looked at that. We looked at different sizes, different locations, and at the end of the day, when we ran the numbers, the cost per unit of water was about 10 times the cost of what currently paying for water. So from a cost-effective standpoint, maybe there's some economies of scale. Maybe there's some things that could be done there to reduce some of those costs, but it's still, almost an order of magnitude more to use water there. Not that that's the only reason why you'd want to do this. There may be political reasons. There may be concerns about water supply or the aquifer that may justify looking at reasons that are not strictly cost-based. But strictly from a cost standpoint, it was quite a bit more expensive to treat locally and keep it locally. We also looked at what about taking that treated water at the treatment plant right now and turning around and pumping that up and distributing to these same locations. And that was quite a bit more cost effective. You've already invested the infrastructure for that facility. You've already got a type of facility that will create great water. The goal for the city to have Class A, that provides a lot of opportunities to not only reuse at parks but other types of uses. And so long term, that may be part of your portfolio, and especially when you've gone already to the extent of treating that water.
I think Walter has a question for you here.
Yeah.
However, where the scalping plant program is 10 times the current amount the city charges for water, the piping it back from the plant in a purple pipe system is 6 times the current charge
For water.
that city charges for water.
Yeah.
So
It's still
yes, it's better, but it's
still not cost effective. Yeah. And what we see sometimes is where it becomes more and more cost effective is when you start having the infrastructure already in place. Say you go for a park or a new development that may be near the treatment facility. The cost to put in that purple pipe right at the beginning of the development is pretty low compared to coming in after the fact and dealing with all the utilities and the asphalt and the permitting. So sometimes a little bit of foresight up front can open up doors down the road. Long term, I'd see that the reuse could be part of your portfolio. More and more communities are going that way. You'll see Meridian's sort of an example where they're investing quite a bit. I'd say they're probably spending more money than the return at this point, but in the long term, that may change, and it may be the most cost effective, especially as requirements get more and more strict in your discharge. It seems like the cost to treat just goes up and up over time. This figure shows your collection system. Just kind of zoom in. This is the summary of improvements that came out of the master plan. In addition to these, the previous figure I showed had pipeline extensions, but you can see the priority 1 improvement is this parallel pipeline. It's basically connecting on to the existing 36-inch line, Councilman Steed, you were referring to, and continuing that down to the treatment plant. This is another phase that would allow flow that's coming from the south part to get diverted and to convey it all the way to the treatment plant. This is priority 1B, so we show that down the road, not too far. That's, again, near the Troy Road or Highway 8, where that would be needed. And then we identified one other priority area that would recommend some additional monitoring, and that be maybe some planned improvements be completed there in the near future. Other improvements will be needed before your 2030 planning period. So this gives you a little bit of a roadmap and some phasing on how you can you can accommodate the growth over time. One thing we've tried to do as we've looked at each of these improvements is tie those improvements to growth. So that in the report you'll find there's a table that each one of those sections that we have a improvement identified. We also say this is how many more connections or ERUs, equivalent residential units, that you can put upstream of that location before that becomes a capacity concern. The purpose of doing that was to give the city some planning guidance, and so that you could basically do a little declining balance and just say, okay, this is how much more before we need to pull the trigger and do that improvement. Each of the projects we identified, we developed a capital improvement sheet. This is a snapshot of what one of those looks like. It shows some detailed cost estimates. These are planning level cost estimates, but there's a fair amount of detail. We tried to work with the city and identify the amount of surface restoration, what kind there'd be, if there were highway crossings, railroad crossings, to try to get these planning estimates as accurate as possible so you could use for your future budget. Once we'd completed that for each of the improvements, we developed this capital improvement plan, a summary of all the improvements. You see we have this particular column shows what we anticipate the cost will be for those projects. Recognizing that you're underway in a rate study, we also looked at what benefit do each of these improvements provide future growth, because many of these improvements are they're not needed unless growth occurs, or they may be such that they're oversized so they're accommodating some existing need but also providing a lot of future need. And so we've tried to estimate what we feel would be benefit to future users so that you could use that data as you calculate your general facilities charges or your connection fees.
Sounds like Tom has a question for you.
Yeah, this might be more for Les, but when I'm looking at the prioritization of these, and I'm thinking also about the presentation that we've heard from Tyler about which streets he wants to prioritize for slurry seals and which are going to get some kind of a treatment. I'm just wondering if there's good communication between scheduling of these kinds of things and scheduling of those kinds of things, because, I'd hate to, the obvious, we'd hate to do a treatment and then come in and tear it up, or if we think we're going to do a treatment in a few years, we're thinking about what's happening underneath. Of course, your nod is already answering my question, I think.
Or even asked.
Well, yeah, maybe if I may, Madam Mayor, you're absolutely right. Those are very important that we do coordinate, and that is actually one of the benefits of a plan like this, because it helps us establish what the sewer system priorities are going to be. The water comp plan, which you'll see in another 6 or 8 weeks or so, will do the same thing. And within the street department and Tyler's work, as you refer to, he is trying to establish a 3 to 5 year projection of what his priorities are going to be on the road system. So then all of that comes together in me, if you will, because I oversee all those groups.
All those things.
And the coordination amongst all the different divisions that we do on a weekly basis to make sure that, yes, we are indeed planning all those together, and we're going to make sure that those utilities that need to go in prior to the road job or with the road job, all of that does happen. So, yes, absolutely.
Thanks.
It relates to our park system as we look at linear parks and other kinds of development and the prospect of some tree planting projects and those sorts of things. So I think that's another argument for citywide GIS coordination. It's very familiar to engineering, but it's not yet reaching all the departments, and there may be a public art installation that could affect this sort of thing too. So we'll try to work toward that for our next budget cycle.
And that is occurring more and more frequently. Part of our planning is to make sure that we can reach out to others within the city organization, be it parks or arts, but also even outside the organization to the franchise utilities. Working with Avista to let
Right.
them know that, we're going to come along in a year or two and do a road project of this type or a sewer project, so they can then work that into their
Planning,
capital plan. as
fiber
well.
optic, whatever
all
it might be. Yeah.
Right.
And
20-minute
I think
asphalt.
that, you're coming back to your comment, I mean, that's why you do these plans, is so you can coordinate those things. We're just finishing up another plan for another community. I won't mention their name, but, we said, hey, this line would be just perfect if it were 12-inch. And that's kind of not a priority today, but probably in the next couple of years. And they said, we just reconstructed that road last year. And another section, same community, they already had plans designed and ready to bid for a 10-inch line, and we're saying, that corridor will actually need a 15-inch line for build-out. You might want to think about spend a little bit extra money now and get that 15-inch line so that you're not going to be coming back in here in 10 years or 15 years and redoing a whole other line. So that's the benefit of a plan. And once you have that in place, then you're able to coordinate that with your improvements that you're completing. Where do you go from here? Les mentioned that there's a comment period. We're anxious to get your comments and thoughts. DEQ has reviewed the document. That's the Department of Environmental Quality. And they've given us some really minimal comments, which we plan on addressing in the final report. Once we've addressed those comments and incorporated those into a final document, next steps would be to adopt it and incorporate that into your comprehensive plan, as well as your user rate and impact fees or facility charges. And then as far as the actual implementation of the improvements, we'd recommend you start with the priority 1A improvements. That should be something, again, it's an area there's a risk right now of overflows, so that should be something that should be budgeted for and financing secured to do as quickly as possible.
So a question, you uttered the phrase impact fees, and that this council has discussed that on previous occasions, but you showed a chart earlier that was talking about projected population growth, and I wonder, have other communities used that as the tool, as a trigger for implementation of impact fees?
I'm aware most communities use connection fees or system development charges or service availability fees, whatever the name is. Facility charge, general facility charge, I think here is what you referred to that. Most entities use that for their utilities. And although I'm aware, I think the city of Nampa actually may use impact fees to recover some of their planned utility improvements. But most cities use these connection fees to pay for the growth component of those improvements. And not only the growth components, but often those connection fees or general facility charges can include other things. We've given you the numbers for the collection system. There's also the treatment component, which is outside of this scope, but needs to be addressed as you look at your rates. And then also there's a value to your existing system. You have some surplus capacity in your treatment plant and some of your trunk lines. When somebody comes in and develops, you're entitled as a city to get reimbursed for those if you so choose. And so those are things, all those things come into play as you look at what you want to do with your facility charges.
Walter, I saw your hand up.
Thank you, ma'am. On page 7.3 of your document, you have the statement that it is reasonable to expect new development to pay for the additional capacity of the improvements constructed to service system expansion. And I wrote in the margin, impact fees, ? This city council has taken a position to not, the previous city council, that I was sitting on it, had taken a position not to go to impact fees. I personally believe in the current economy that all impact fees would do would keep any few little whatever projects we might see come to Moscow not come to fruition. We do have, what is the term, Les? Capacity fees?
General facility charge?
I'm sorry.
General facility charge?
That are part of both our water and sewer rate structure. So we do meet your 7.3
can,
comment. But I believe that your slide comment using the phrase impact fees is not appropriate until such times the city council says it is.
gladly remove it.
Just a comment on my part.
Yeah, no, in fact, connection fee is usually the preferred mechanism.
And I don't have any problem with that. But using that term, it can turn off developers, it can turn off large developers that look at coming at a community. I had something come to me the other day from someone about some presumed developer that was looking at something and saw that we were participating in some kind of something, not impact fees, and they presumably walked away because of it. We really aren't, but somewhere they got the idea that we were. And so they really said, well, that's not really where somewhere we want to go. So I'm just a little sensitive in trying to stay away from buzzwords that can have negative connotations, in my opinion, in terms of development. I don't have any problem collecting the fees to do what you're talking about doing. I think your point's very well taken.
Right, and I think the point is that there are thresholds whereupon it's going to cost all of us more money, and whether that's borne by a particular development or the public as a whole or some segment of the community that's affected by that particular line.
A new USDA building on Mountain View Road, a new two-house construction down near where Bill Belknap lives, a new renovated restaurant on 6th Street. You can impact the fee all you want out of those. They're not paying for anything in this study. I mean, this thing's got such big numbers in it that that's not even going to scratch anything.
Okay.
That's the end.
Okay.
Unless you got more questions,
The end.
that was my last slide. So.
Thank you, well done. Let's see, anybody give you a chance to talk? Well, Walter's on it. Okay, Walter?
Thank you, ma'am. I think it's a very good report. I'm impressed with it. I have read it. I've talked to Les about, I'm not going to bore the council or talk to you about the tabs. Les and I have had a conversation today, and some things he is tweaking, and some things he's explained to me why it's not a concern. There are a couple of things in the report, though, that came to my attention that I think are worthy of note. One is the fact that we do not apparently have an agreement with the University of Idaho to treat their wastewater. I think that is something that we do need to work toward. I see Gary reaching for the mic. Presume it's to agree with me and to tell me that we're going to be doing that. But and Les and I have talked about that. But I think that is something that should be looked at, and that's not necessarily fees or anything. It's just an agreement that we will treat your wastewater, and you will not put radioactive stuff from your labs down the pipe to us and stuff like that, possibly. Another item, I was a little concerned to read a December 2009 report by USKH out of Spokane that the South Lift Station, the new pumps are inefficient. And we just rebuilt that lift station. So I've talked to Les about that. He's indicated there's some reasons for it. There was some impeller questions or problems. There's some other things that need to be looked at, and he's indicated to me he's going to review the review on that. I hate to see us spend that kind of money and then have a plan come along, take a look at our system and say, oops, that lift station's not working as good as it should. And then the other items I've mentioned about impact fees and purple piping, I think. But it's a good report. I don't have any problem with it. I'm looking forward to seeing it go through public comment. Maybe the public will comment. I don't know. I know David's read it, so that helps me. That's why I read it, because I saw him reading it. So didn't want him to get ahead of me. Thank you, ma'am.
Okay. Other comments or questions? Okay. Sounds like we happily accept your report and appreciate your good work on this. Look forward to the outcome of this public comment period so we continue to move forward.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for
Thank you very
coming up.
much.